Welcome back to Tangible Talks podcast. Today we're diving into our third episode exploring change. Last week we began to discuss Exodus and how God called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Today we will continue our journey with Moses and how God walks with him and the Israelites through this changing season.
In our podcast, we will read the story of Abram in Genesis 15, when God spoke to him and revealed his plans for the children of Abraham. Then we will talk about the plagues. And is plague the correct term? The response of the Egyptians when their world was changing, the response of the Hebrews to change, and the change in Moses.
All right, we're at it again. You ready?
We're at it again. I'm as ready as I can be, Jana.
Well, I'm excited, and we were briefly mentioning before we started recording that are we ever going to feel adequate at this? And I think the answer is no, and I think that is okay. So we will explore that question in a little more depth later on, but I just want to mention before we dive into this, for anybody out there who feels inadequate at what they are doing, you're not alone. And I think anytime you explore some new change in your life, again, we're focusing on change this series, I would say it's expected to feel inadequate or not enough. And it's okay. It's okay to feel that way. And just know that you are enough and that you can do this and God will be with you to help you.
He will. And it keeps you humble.
Yes.
And you need to do it in your way, the way that you do things. You don't need to change your way of speaking, change your way of being. Because if God's called you to do something, then you are enough with Him to do it.
And that really picks up where we left off. So God had just reaffirmed Moses that he has given him everything that he needs to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, to deliver them. And the plan is set, the preparation has commenced, and now God is calling him and Aaron to act.
There was something that you mentioned to me about had the children of Israel been in Egypt for 400 years. And for some reason, I hesitated in giving an answer because I really wanted to go back and look at it. And we also spoke about Moses' mother. She saw something different in him. And the children of Israel, the children of Abraham, the Hebrews, were expecting a deliverer. And why were they expecting a deliverer? So I went back to Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 through 16. I'd like to read you those scriptures and then talk to you a little bit about what I saw in these scriptures.
That would be great.
Okay. Then the Lord said to Abram. Now at this time, he is Abram. He is not Abraham. He does not have any children. And this is what God said. Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterwards they shall come out with great possessions. And then in verse 16, and they shall come back here in the 4th generation. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So there's a lot to unpack in these 3 verses, but judgment, delivery, and they'll have possessions, they'll have what they need. So in the 4th generation, the children of Abraham knew to start looking for a deliverer. God already prepared and is talking to them in advance. So I just wanted to touch on that before we get to the Moses, because Moses is the deliverer. Obviously, this is the 4th generation. I don't know when you start counting 4th generation, but we're in it. Right. And God is going to judge this nation because they are afflicting someone else. And they will be delivered. A lot of people may not like that word, delivered, set free, no longer a slave to something, which sounds good to me. And
Yes.
So here we are back in Egypt.
So that's a little bit of the backstory from Genesis to Exodus and kind of bridging the gap between the two and picking up with where we are now. So Following up in Exodus chapter 5, I wanted to talk a little bit about Pharaoh's response to the request for the Israelites to be able to go and worship their God. He did not take the request very kindly. In fact, he was outraged, I would say, by the request. And he took it as a sign of laziness, that they had too much time on their hands to develop these ideas. And so they must need to work harder. And so in order for them to work harder, he took away the straw that they needed to make the bricks. That was the work that they were doing during this time. And so he told them that they were going to have to find their own straw to make the bricks, but that the brick load that they were making needed to be the same as it was before. Anyway, he was very angry about it, and he took it as a sign of laziness.
A few things are going on here. Pharaoh was God. The people worshiped him. Whatever he said was the law. And so here comes someone else saying there's another God besides him, and he's not liking it. And if you touch someone's God, something that they hold very dear, you're going to know really soon that you touched something you shouldn't have touched. And generally, they're going to come back with control, which was what Pharaoh was doing.
Mm-hmm.
He was controlling them. He was saying, hey, I have the power, and this isn't going to happen. It reveals the mindset of Pharaoh, and people never crossed him because it never ended well. So this is what's going on here. I think the Hebrews, they didn't know what to do. What are we going to do? Now it's more work for us. Who is this
Mm-hmm.
Moses? He came in here. Probably wasn't the best situation, but now it's not. It's really not a good situation.
Yeah, and their response is interesting because they're angry now. Like, they're questioning Moses and Aaron, and they're angry with them, and they're like, "Well, things were fine before you created all this stir, and now things are worse." But I think it's an interesting point of view because we gotta remember that they're slaves. They are enslaved. And the fact that, yes, things are now worse, but, like, they couldn't have been great before because their life is dedicated to being enslaved to Pharaoh. And so it's just an interesting perspective because I think that trying to relate this in today's terms, I think sometimes we can be stuck in a situation that's fine, but it's not a good situation, or
It's
it goes,
working.
yes,
It's working.
it's working.
You
It's
can do it. Now, and I'm sure they got out of bed dreading going and doing work. I'm sure they lived oppressed. And here's a wake-up call. Here's a wake-up call. What they focused on was now we've got to work harder
yeah.
instead of, hey, God has heard us. And this is the beginning.
Mhm.
So how are you going to look at it?
They're gonna have to have a big mindset adjustment to be ready for God's plan.
Right. Because if you do not change your mindset, you're keeping yourself in prison.
Mhm.
And how I relate that to taking this story and relating it in our everyday life is one, are you in a relationship that is not a good relationship, but you've accepted it and God wants to set you free from it and He's waking you up to this? Are you in a job or a living situation to where it's not a good situation? Have you cried out before and said, God, help me, deliver me? And now God is doing that and it's more uncomfortable. Open your eyes to this. See what's going on. And the response, if you're in a relationship, and that can be a personal relationship, that can be friends, that can be a relationship with someone that you're working with. When you bring to light, hey, maybe we could change this and it could be different, and they clamp down on you, it tells you a lot about that person. It tells you a lot about their control. It tells you a lot that they're going to have their way or no way.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
that's important information. We may not like it. And we may say, what? How did I get here? But that's where prayer comes in. And what we're going to see is God break down all the barriers, not in the way we thought it should be done, but He does it because there's a master plan behind it. There's a reason. And even in this, God is trying to win Pharaoh. He's trying to set the Egyptians free as much as he's going to set the Israelites free. But God is God, and he already knows what their reply is going to be.
Mhm.
And so earlier I said, so are these plagues or are these miracles? Because God calls them miracles. In Exodus 4:21, when you go back to Egypt, and he's talking to Moses, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles that I have put in your power. But we call them plagues because they plagued the Egyptian and they didn't see them as miracles. How are you looking at a situation in your life? "Oh, I'm just plagued by this, nothing. Oh, gloom, despair, and agony on me. I'll always be this way." Or can you see it as a miracle that God's waking you up and saying, if you let me, I'll get you out of this situation because I want to bless you.
Yeah. And it definitely doesn't mean that you won't have to go through some hardships to get out of it. I can think about this in my relationship with Jordan. When you mentioned a relationship, when you're in a relationship that is just mediocre or worse, or it's just not all that it could be, that doesn't mean that it's always going to stay that way. So we got married very young. We got married when I was 22. And in pursuit of his career, we moved out directly to South Dakota. Again, I'm originally from Alabama, so Alabama to South Dakota was a big adjustment for me. We had a great experience, but then we left there after a couple years and we went to Connecticut. And again, he was following his career trajectory and it was growing and building. And so his next stop was at UConn, which was in Connecticut. There, things got really rocky really fast. And so it just shows you how relationships have seasons. They can change, they can be really good, and then something can happen and it's not so good. So we moved to Connecticut. I was 24. He was 25, I guess. And so again, still pretty young in my mind. That may not seem young to everybody, but we were young. We'd been together for a long time, but it was a big adjustment. And so we did not have a lot of money. Our finances were not in a great state. So he went straight into working full time all day, every day, get things cleaned up for his situation. And so I was just kind of left alone. I was alone in that I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any family. We couldn't afford to have like TV at the time. We were really trying to save money because the move had just wiped out our savings. And so I was just alone. I wasn't going to start work until the fall, and it was the summertime because at the time I was a teacher. And so I was just by myself all day, every day without a TV. And
Mm.
it was really rough. He had completely dedicated his life to his job, and I felt like an afterthought that I no longer mattered to him. He was chasing something, and I couldn't see it. Like I didn't want that life. I was supportive. I wanted to support him in his career, but there's a difference between working hard and being fruitful with your labors and things like that, and then letting it overtake you and consume your entire identity and your entire life. And I felt like he had very much moved over into that camp. And I tried to express myself a couple of times, probably didn't do the best job of doing that and voicing my concerns. I was probably not probably, I was very accusatory because I wasn't a very good communicator at the time either. And so it was rough. And after about 4 to 5 months of that, I was like, this just isn't going to work for me. Like this is not good enough. I can't be in a relationship with somebody who's not in a relationship with me, who's not willing to put our marriage as a priority. And so I had to tell him that. I had to have that really rough conversation that I was shocked I was having because up until that point, we had been together for I, I don't know, like 8 years. And we had had such a solid foundation, but things changed and priorities changed, and it was no longer good. It was just no longer good. And so while it was hard to have that conversation, it needed to be had. And he was willing to listen to me. And it was sort of a wake up call for him. I don't think he ever knew how serious I felt about it not potentially not working out, because I wasn't going to be in a relationship that didn't value marriage in our time.
I appreciate your openness and your honesty because you just bared yourself.
We've talked about this. He would be fine with me mentioning this. And I share that because I know people are in relationships right now who it may not be what they want it to be. And you need to voice that. You need to have a conversation with them. And in my case, it worked out. It didn't happen overnight, but I stopped holding things in. I stopped bottling everything up, and I started talking and communicating how I felt. And it made a huge difference because, like I said, I was doing a lot of blaming on him, but I wasn't communicating the problems that I was having, like the real issues that I was having. And once I stopped blaming him for everything and communicated, "Hey, this is how I feel. This is why I feel this way, and I don't want to feel this way. I want our marriage to be better than this."
Mm.
Things changed. And I'm not going to say that that's always going to be the case, but it can't change if it's never even brought to the surface.
Yes. And so you needed to change your way of communicating. And you had to realize you wanted to move forward. And that's a change. And first off, you can never change anyone. If there's anyone that you can change, it's going to be you. And that is a difficult person to deal with yourself.
Mhm. And
But,
acknowledging that
and
you are part of the problem.
exactly, because it's real easy to do the blame game because it started back in the Garden of Eden. A sheep, but God, you gave me this woman and she did it. Well, it was that snake. Well, it was this. We're really good at the blame. Can you stop it? Can you truly stop that mindset and say, maybe I need to change my thinking?
Mhm.
And I mentioned earlier that I'm recently married. It's not even 2 months yet. You may have gotten married early. I waited a little late. And the way that Tommy approaches things is so different than mine. And I could say, "Well, you're just wrong. Stop that." But I knew that there was something in me. And I went on a fast because I needed to get an answer. So I went on a fast. And I learned to communicate with him and say, "Why is this important to you?" And I got the thought process behind it, which opened up communications, which he was able to relate stories to me. I was able to relate stories to him. And the fasting was just very, very important. But I was fasting to change me and to not change him. I needed my mindsets to change. And I prayed for him. And in the process, God did something in him. I didn't pray for God to change him, but in this, that full circle came about. I posted something on my Facebook that I read. It's from the Naked Marriage podcast, and it says, "Every time you complain about your spouse, your heart hardens toward them.
Mm.
Every time you pray for your spouse, your heart softens toward them."
Mm.
So, can we change the way we talk and view our spouse? Can we? And if you can't, ask God to help you with it. Be more kind, be more loving.
Yes. And
And
sometimes you may need to step away, particularly when I was learning to change my communication style, because to be honest, it was horrible when we got married. I was not easy to deal with, I'm sure, like looking back at it, because I had such a temper and nothing was ever my fault.
Oh,
which
no,
is
you were
ridiculous.
perfect. I remember you being the perfect little Jana growing up.
um, but it took a long time to change that behavior. And again, it didn't happen overnight, but in order to change a behavior, you really have to start changing your habits. And so when something was upsetting me, again, like my first response was I never wanted to talk about my feelings. I am not a super touchy feeling person. And I used to be so uncomfortable with my own feelings. And so I would get angry and I'd have to stop and I'd tell him, I was like, we'll talk about this. And because Jordan was very much, well, let's always talk about everything. And I'm like, oh gosh, here we go again. And so I would tell him, I'm like, I need a minute because I'm not going to be able to express myself well if we do it right now.
Well, and with Tommy, I will express myself like way too freely and way too quickly. So with Tommy, I I just got really quiet, which is unusual for me, if you know me. And I went, I've got to think this through. Why am I reacting this way? Wonder why he said it this way. And I mean, it would be a day or two, and I would come back and I go, okay, I'm ready to talk about this. And I wasn't angry. And
Yeah.
so from my childhood, I will either just be very loud and attack you, or I will run away because I grew up in a home where my dad was an alcoholic. And whenever he would get drunk and beat my mother, we would have to throw anything we could into the car and leave and go to my grandmother's. And we would be there, and then daddy would call, I'll change my ways. And then we would go from my grandmother's back to daddy's. And I did that the first 12 years of my life. So I have to be very careful that my knee jerk reaction isn't to run. Fine. That's fine with
Yeah.
me. I'll do this. And that's not what God's wanting to do. And there are many things that God's healing in me right now from when I was a little kid
Yeah.
and changing the way that I look at it. And when you have a change on the inside, it will be seen, it will be obvious to the outside. So, really, that's what God's doing with Pharaoh, the Egyptians, and the children of Israel. Let's change. Let's do something different here. So, plagues or miracles?
Yes, and I would label this like of Exodus. This is probably my least favorite part. I just don't like the plagues.
Well,
So
but okay.
this is what I think of as the weird stuff. This is the stuff that's hard for me to wrap my head around. So I'm hoping that you can help me wrap my head around it.
Well, I can't dive too deep in this right now, but I do want to say that there was a reason for each one. They worshiped the Nile. They had frog gods. There was a reason why God chose to deal or to show up in a certain way, in a certain order. So if you want to go back and look up what those were and go back to and study Egyptian history and see what that symbolized, then it'll make a lot more sense to you. God can go deep. I mean, you could probably do a doctorate in the 10 plagues because there's so much there.
I think one thing that's hard for new readers of scripture to get behind is the 10th plague, the killing of the firstborn. It seems really harsh, like we think of God as a good God and
The
he's
Bible will,
good, but
yeah,
and then he's
and
doing
he
such a bad thing. Like it's again, it's perspective, but it's
it
tough
is
to
perspective.
swallow.
It is tough to swallow. And it's okay to say, this is tough to swallow, and I'm having a really difficult time with this. So I need you to help me. And again, I told you, I'll put a question mark in my Bible and go, this, why? What is this?
Mhm.
But a lot of this is symbolism. And when you get into the books that we're not really excited about reading, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, you will see that God says the firstborn are mine. The firstborn's mine.
Mm,
So he's asking Pharaoh, he's asking the Egyptians to choose him as their God. And they don't. So their firstborn goes to their God and not to God.
mm.
You fall under the protection of God, he'll protect you and the firstborn because those are his anyway. And that's what the Passover represents. God passed over those who believed him, had him as their God. Death passed over. You don't choose that way, you're choosing death. Anyone that's in your household that you're responsible for. They were plunged into darkness, the ninth plague. Between the ninth plague and the 10th plague, you have the Passover. And death comes in. And those who chose to believe in God, to apply the blood, were saved. We don't like it because, Pharaoh, why can't you just? But it's
Yeah.
free will, free choice, and some people will say no. Does that help a little
Yeah.
bit?
I think so. It was helpful to me.
Okay. I'm just going to read the list of these wonderful things that went on.
Okay.
Water to blood, frogs, gnats. I can't even sit outside sometimes in the summer because the gnats are so bad. I'm in the South, obviously, my Southern
Oh, yeah.
accent.
Same.
Then flies. Ooh. Then the livestock die. Then they have boils, hail, locusts, darkness, death. It is a falling into death.
Mhm.
And all of these things still did not get their attention. It dealt with gods that they worshiped. And God
Mm.
was showing, I do believe that Ra is their sun god. Please forgive me if I'm wrong on this. And God is showing, I'm even greater than that.
With the
I'm going to make
darkness.
it dark. I'm going to make it dark. Where's your sun god now?
Mm.
I think sometimes preachers of the gospel say it really hard now. Where is this now? But it's not that. God is saying, where's your God? Because they're not really a God. It is empty. Trust me. I've
Mm.
got you. I will give you life. Just believe in me. And he makes a way out of death if you will believe. And he's given you free will. You have a choice. You have a choice to change. You have a choice to change your stinky thinking. Stinking thinking is what I used to say to my girls. They would just get this stinky attitude and it would build up. And I go, okay, I'm going to address this stinking thinking. This is not how this is going to go. And God wants to
I,
deal
I
with some of ours stinking thinking.
I like what you mentioned about it's free will. I think some people are turned off to religion or Christianity or throw whatever term you want to throw in there because it's like, well, if God's predetermined everything, then, what does it matter? But
Well,
it's not.
no, and as you get older, there's some things that's just very apparent. A
Mm.
bird is going to sing. A dog is going to bark. And you immediately know with Sydney, your dog, that if someone comes to that front door, she is just gonna. So is that predetermined or do you know what's in her?
Mm.
Nature reveals all of the goodness of God. Nature reveals a snake is gonna bite you, a bird's gonna fly. Is that predetermined? Is it's nature? God already knows how you're gonna react in a situation. He said that to Abraham when the two angels came down before they went into Sodom. They said, should we not tell Abram what we're going to do, seeing that he will train his children, seeing that he will be righteous and serve the true God? So they knew what Abraham's nature was, and before he even had children, they applied that. That's grace. God will apply grace in your life because he knows that when you get it, you are going to be free and you are going to be a blessing. You're going to bless other people. And in blessing other people, you will be blessed.
That's good. I want to go back to Exodus 6
Okay.
and talk about how Moses feels defeated. He feels responsible.
Mm.
Ever since he came back, he's brought more misery on these people, but God promises deliverance. And there's a couple of quotes in here. One of them is, because of my mighty hand, he, meaning Pharaoh, will drive them out of his country. There's a couple things that going along that theme of things aren't predetermined and predestined, and God's not like the puppet master, you know, he also says that I will harden Pharaoh's heart. What do you think he mean? Like, what's your interpretation
Oh,
of what that means?
that just gets I'm gonna tell you how I see it. There have been times in my life where there have been really good things happen to me, and it appears like I'm the luckiest person on the face of the earth. Everything goes good for you. You just must think you're Miss Goody Two Shoes. And every time something good would happen to me and I was recognized for it, even though it took hard work and I had to have discipline and I had to do it, the people that didn't like me, that just gave them another reason to not like me. The good things that happened to me hardened their heart towards me. The more I was blessed, the more they hated me. So
Mm,
when Moses would tell Pharaoh, "Let my people go. If you don't, then this time tomorrow, your livestock's going to die." And you know what? The livestocks would die. And
mm,
Pharaoh would get mad at Moses, at this God who's interrupting his day, and his heart was hardened. Pharaoh hardened it. God's blessings, the things that God was doing to set his people free, those acts were part of the hardening, but the
I see.
hardening was a process of it.
I see. And God knew that those acts would harden his heart.
Yes, because he knew Pharaoh. He knew those things. There may be times when you've got a brother or sister in your family, you've got a brother or sister, and things are going really good for you, and they get mad because things are going good for you. I'm sure that whoever's listening can relate to this. And did you purposely do this to harden their heart toward you? No, it's part of the process. Going into Egypt, Moses was completely different from the Moses on the return trip. Okay? So when you're going into this season of change and when God will set you free and he will bless you, when you go through this, you will not think the same way. You will not see things the same way. Moses had an experience in a tangible way. He experienced the presence, the guidance, the provisions from God. But he also experienced the trials, the confrontations, the misunderstandings, the pressures from the Egyptians and the Israelites. He experienced both of those things. Why? Because we need both. One reveals the nature of God, and the other, the fears and frailty and lack of change of humans. Both are necessary to know. I once thought like a child, and now I've put away childish things. So Moses experienced both of those. When you're going through change, you're going to get closer to God. You're going to have an encounter with God. You're going to see things you never saw before. It's going to be exciting. But there's going to be humans that we deal with that aren't going to be that excited that you're changing. Your thoughts are changing. And friends, sometimes friends want you to stay exactly as you are. Stay down here with us.
Yeah.
Don't
And
change.
I would say that's not a friend.
No,
That's not a person you want to be friends with.
it's not if you want to grow and you want to know more about God. Now, can you leave them behind? Can you leave Egypt behind to go to a better place? And this is what they're facing.
And at the start of this, it goes back to Moses, and I think Moses is so relatable because he is just so he feels so inadequate, and he asks multiple times, like, and he just keeps coming up with these excuses. And he says, "If the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me?" And it brings up the question, which I think is a fair question by Moses, by the way,
Yes.
but it naturally brings up the question, have you ever felt inadequate or ill equipped to fulfill a role or perform a task?
I feel so inadequate about what I'm doing here right now. And I'm not doing that to answer your question. When we were getting ready to record, I thought you were online and I was just talking to you. You asked me, "Are you ready to do this?" And I said, I guess I am. Will there ever be a time when I don't feel inadequate? I just don't think that I prepared well enough. Maybe if I prepare well enough, maybe this, and those are excuses, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did was I just prayed and I said, God, help me. Help me to be a blessing. Be with me. And he wants us to say those things because just as he was with Moses, he will be with us. Circumstances may be different, but God is not a respecter of persons and he's not discriminative. He will do for you and I what he's done for others.
Yeah.
Will we believe it? And can we, in the process, be honest and transparent and say, I'm struggling. I don't feel adequate. Don't feel prepared. I'm walking on ground I'm not so sure about. And again,
Yeah.
that's
I
an
was just about
honest
to say,
reply.
like, it's being honest and acknowledging and knowing that no one is perfect. And if you wait until you've prepared enough or that you are ready enough, it will never happen.
No.
There is no such thing as being perfectly prepared and ready to go.
Remember when you started college and you just were unsure. How's this going to go? What about my classes? And about the time you get it nailed down, you graduate.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's on to something else that's going to make you feel the exact same way. And I have really shifted my mindset on that. I would say my biggest insecurity still is I don't feel smart enough. I don't know what it is about my childhood that makes me feel that way, but I struggle with not feeling intelligent enough or smart enough. I'm not good enough. And I've really shifted my mindset on that to say instead of dreading those moments or feeling so small when some new challenge or a project comes up, to because my first instinct is still, "Oh, I can't do this. I'm not good enough." And I quickly shake out of that and tell myself, "You can do this. You have overcome every challenge that life has thrown your way, and God's not going to give you something that you can't handle. You can do this." And enjoy the learning along the way because it's going to be a good learning experience, and lean on others who can support you because you're not supposed to have all the answers by yourself. You just have to be willing to own your lack of knowledge. You have to own it, and you have to be be transparent and honest about what you do know and put your best effort into something, and that's all you can do. All right. Well, I think that brings us to a close this week. Are we ready to end in prayer?
Yeah. So as we close in prayer today, I want to say a very simple, short prayer. Prayer does not have to be long to be heard by God. It's not in a multitude of words, but it's in a simple heart cry. Nick Saban, when speaking at a leadership conference, said, I always ask people when it comes to serving somebody else, how do you pray? There is a difference. Do you pray to be blessed, or do you pray to be a blessing? If you're a blessing, you're affecting other people. You are much more effective for you and much more effective in how you are going to affect other people. How are you praying? Are you asking God for things for you to bless you, or are you asking to be a blessing? There is a difference. Know that when you are a blessing, you will be blessed. It's the end result of being a blessing. As we close in prayer today, I want to say a simple prayer, and I ask that you join with me. God, make me a blessing. Reveal this in my life in a tangible way. I love you and trust you. Amen.
Amen. That's so good. That's so good. All right. We want to thank you all for joining us today. Several of you have reached out to express your support, and I can't emphasize how much that means to us. We hope you join us again next week as we discuss the behaviors and mindsets of the Hebrews on their way to the Promised Land.